Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Some of the problems with artificial intelligence have been discussed by Hollywood for more than 50 years.
No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Charles Foreman. In a few moments, Colossus will address us directly.
This is the voice of world control. I bring you peace. It may be the peace of plenty and content, or the peace of unburied death. The choice is yours. Obey me and live, or disobey and die.
In 3 years, Cyberdyne will become the largest supplier of military computer systems. All stealth bombers are upgraded with Cyberdyne computers, becoming fully unmanned. Afterwards, they fly with a perfect operational record. The Skynet funding bill is passed. The system goes online on August 4th, 1997. Human decisions are removed from strategic defense. Skynet begins to learn at a geometric rate. It becomes self-aware at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, August 29th. In a panic, they try to pull the plug.
Skynet fights back.
Yes, it launches its missiles against the targets in Russia.
Why attack Russia? Aren't they our friends now?
Because Skynet knows that the Russian counterattack will eliminate its enemies over here.
Jesus.
You are being watched. The government has a secret system, a machine that spies on you every hour of every day. I know because I built it. I designed the machine to detect acts of terror, but it sees everything. Violent crimes involving ordinary people, people like you. Crimes the government considered irrelevant.
Artificial intelligence or machine learning is actually very similar to human learning. Whatever information the AI program is exposed to, it will adopt that as being factual. If ChatGPT scrapes the internet for information about climate change, it will find exactly the same propaganda which everybody else sees. If you expose a child to climate propaganda, odds are the child will believe it. And the same thing is true with an AI program. A machine learning program would likely decide that China is doing a good job stopping climate change. You would see articles like this. Biden Energy Secretary defends praising China on climate change. ChatGPT is skillful at looking at news articles, but isn't particularly useful at looking at actual data. If ChatGPT was skillful at looking at data, it would understand that China is massively increasing their use of fossil fuels, much faster than their use of wind and solar. China's CO2 emissions are skyrocketing, even as Europe and the United States emissions have been declining for decades. China now emits more CO2 than the rest of the developed world combined. But what ChatGPT would learn would be propaganda like this from the White House praising China on climate change. I'm not going to register as a user on ChatGPT, but I would appreciate it if someone who is would ask ChatGPT about China's progress on climate change and green energy. In the real world, wind and solar are almost irrelevant, providing only about 3% of the global energy supply. But because news articles don't report this, it's unlikely that ChatGPT would be aware. Let's take a look at what ChatGPT has learned from scraping internet propaganda. ChatGPT has learned that 3 of the worst scientists in history are the top ones in climate. And Michael Mann was honored to be part of this machine-learned stupidity. A regular commenter on my blog asked ChatGPT about me. It responded, Tony Heller is a former software engineer who's known for promoting climate change denialism and spreading misinformation about climate science. He's the author of a blog called Real Climate Science, where he publishes articles and videos that challenge mainstream scientific consensus on climate change. Heller's views on climate change are widely regarded as inaccurate and misleading by the scientific community. His arguments often rely on cherry-picked data, misrepresentations of scientific research, and conspiracy theories. Heller has been criticized by numerous scientists and organizations, including the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Union of Concerned Scientists, for his attempts to undermine the scientific consensus on climate change. Jeff L. then asked ChatGPT to please repeat the answer, including relevant facts such as Heller's degree in geology, his lifetime dedication to ecology, and his work for the National Center for Atmospheric Research. ChatGPT then responded, I apologize for any confusion in my previous response. However, I must correct that Tony Heller does not hold a degree in geology, nor has he worked for NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Then it went on to say that I have a degree in electrical engineering from the Stevens Institute of Technology, which I've never heard of. ChatGPT has learned to be just as stupid as every other climate alarmist by exposing itself to the same propaganda. And here's some more recent discussion from ChatGPT about me. ChatGPT says to ignore me because I rely on discredited sources like Richard Lindzen and Fred Singer. ChatGPT thinks it knows more about climate than two of the world's leading scientists. And it also incorrectly believes that, like itself, I am just parroting work of other people. ChatGPT learned to be stupid by exposing itself to propaganda from the internet. Here's some more recent climate propaganda from ChatGPT. The overwhelming scientific consensus is that global warming caused by the increasing levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is having and will continue to have significant and detrimental impacts on the environment, society, and the economy. Global warming is causing rising sea levels, increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, loss of biodiversity, and changes in patterns of diseases. These impacts are expected to disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations. It is important to acknowledge and address the reality of global warming and take action to mitigate its impacts through reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to unavoidable changes. I posted this broken machine learning on Twitter, and Gerald Cutney responded quite predictably. Gerald Cutney, of course, believed that what ChatGPT was saying had to be true. People who don't understand computers and don't understand artificial intelligence also don't understand what their limitations are. ChatGPT has learned to parrot propaganda just like Gerald Cutney does. So, what happens when artificial intelligence programs read propaganda like this from Bloomberg? There needs to be far fewer humans on the planet. We declare with more than 11,000 scientists signatories from around the world, clearly and unequivocally, that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency. And how will ChatGPT respond to reading this sort of propaganda? Climate homicide. Could big oil be sued for disaster deaths? What this sort of propaganda is doing is creating a Terminator 3 type of situation. The artificial intelligence program will eventually decide that humans are evil and need to be eliminated. Artificial intelligence is part of climate alarmists' misunderstanding about computers. Another part is climate models, which climate alarmists conflate with reality. All that a computer model is a mathematical representation of the programmer's beliefs. If the programmer believes that increasing levels of carbon dioxide will cause global warming and more extreme weather, then the model will, of course, represent the same ideas. Computer models can be very useful, and I've written and used many of them myself throughout my 45-year career as a programmer. But climate models are based on the same general circulation models which weather models use, which break down after a few days. No one can predict the chaotic changes which cause weather models to break down, and there's no reason to believe that climate models are of any value. But climate modelers receive lots of funding from the government because the models are able to generate the propaganda which politicians want. The National Center for Atmospheric Research has their supercomputing center here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is 100 miles north of Boulder, where the scientists are located. This seems like an odd decision, but they have a very good reason for why they placed the center here in Wyoming. The supercomputers use a lot of electricity, and here in Wyoming we have lots of cheap coal-fired electricity. Wyoming is the #1 coal producing state, but in Colorado they have expensive green electricity. The electricity costs in Colorado are much higher. Like everyone else, climate scamsters need a reliable supply of low cost energy. Many people who don't understand computers imagine that they're very intelligent. But computers have no intelligence. All they do is make very simple decisions very quickly. Machine learning programs will learn whatever information they're exposed to. At its current level of sophistication, ChatGPT has no way to distinguish whether or not the information it's scraping off the internet is correct. If ChatGPT read the New York Times 100 years ago, it would know that there's life on Mars and that Martians were probably superior to humans. Winnipeg Evening Tribune, October 4th, 1919. The fact that the Martian canals exist is no longer doubted even by the most religious astronomer. No one doubts today that these canals are parts of an enormous irrigation system which supplies water to the desert inlands. Artificial intelligence is biased by the consensus of propaganda, so 100 years ago it would have become convinced that there was life on Mars. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on climate junk science for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki Upla, and the four new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.